to decide whether or not they would have Sunday shopping. To which the government said, no, hold on. And the Justice Minister of the day decided to say, Sunday shopping will never be heard from. The phrase, the idea, the topic, the notion of Sunday shopping will not be dealt with in Nova Scotia until the year 2005. End of story. I don't want to hear anything more about Sunday shopping. Lo and behold, Mr. Speaker, this is, as you well know, not 2005, this is 2003, and the government is proposing that Sunday shopping go ahead. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've had a test run. And let me quote to you from an article in the Halifax Herald today, and when I'm finished with it, Mr. Speaker, I will table that article. The article in the Halifax Herald today by Roger Taylor. And Roger Taylor indicates that, in fact, in an unscientific Herald online poll, 91% of those who participated in the survey were in favor of the government's decision to go ahead with last Sunday's shopping. Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'll continue to quote from the article. This is Mr. Taylor's, in his words, after Sunday's experience, I think most people are convinced the provincial government should stop trying to fight public opinion by continuing to regulate store hours. And he goes on to say that perhaps if the Ham government conducts a post-mortem on its Sunday experiment, it will realize the futility of regulating shopping hours. Government should save taxpayers millions by canceling a wasteful plebiscite it plans for next fall. It already knows the outcome. The outcome, according to all of the polls, according to anyone that you talk to, is going to be that Nova Scotians, the majority of Nova Scotians, are now in favor of Sunday shopping.
Order, please. The honourable member will be tabling that document.
I will table it, Mr. Speaker. If I may, at the conclusion of my speech, because I'd like to quote from it just a little bit more later on, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal caucus has been very clear on this issue. We have been a very clear position on providing Nova Scotians with shopping every day of the week, as well as providing retailers with the choice to open their shops every day. And we have had that position consistently, Mr. Speaker, not just during the election campaign, consistently for a very long time, Mr. Speaker. That has been the position of the Liberal caucus. It was a big vote getter, Mr. Speaker. As a matter of fact, we got more of the popular vote than the NDP. That's a fact, but perhaps, I know the seats didn't work out the way I wanted them to, but the percentage was certainly there, Mr. Speaker. And the next time around, whenever it may be, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Let me get back to the topic. Hopefully not 4 years, Mr. Speaker. Let me get back to the topic of Sunday shopping, Mr. Speaker. Sunday shopping, in some cases, it's an advantage, as my NDP colleagues have pointed out, for busy families. It's an advantage in some cases to shop on Sundays, as well as for shift workers. And I don't know the percentage, but I dare say that there's a large percentage of people in this province who are shift workers. I worked on Sundays myself. Police officers work on Sundays. Nurses work on Sundays. Paramedics work on Sundays. There are all sorts of people in this province who work on Sundays and have worked on Sundays as part of their life, become accustomed to their life. Now, Mr. Speaker, what I'm not saying is that there will be perhaps some people who will be put at a disadvantage because of Sunday shopping. That's where we come into play, Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, as legislators. We have an obligation to make sure that workers' rights are protected. We have that obligation. I think we'll live up to that obligation, Mr. Speaker. I think we'll have no problem doing that. Workers will be protected from working 7 days straight, and no one, again, I reiterate, no one in this province is going to be forced to work on a Sunday. If you don't want to work on a Sunday, you won't work on a Sunday. Mr. Speaker, the hours of business, of course I support Sunday shopping. Of course I do. It goes without saying. But any piece of legislation that comes forward in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, can be improved, That's why we do what we do. That's why we have these debates. That's why we propose such things as amendments to legislation, Mr. Speaker. We make the legislation better, hopefully. And in our case, Mr. Speaker, you know, we'll take a close look at this legislation. We'll make sure, Mr. Speaker, that the rights are protected. The plebiscite, Mr. Speaker, in itself, the plebiscite, I tend to agree with the writer in the Herald, Roger Taylor. Not just because he happens to be from Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. Let me make that point, although it is a good point nonetheless. But Mr. Taylor states that plebiscite would be a waste of money when you already know the outcome. And I tend to agree with that. Even the New Democratic Party tends to agree with that if Sunday shopping is inevitable, as they say, then to have a plebiscite would be a waste of money. And that's agreed, Mr. Speaker. Agreed. I agree that the plebiscite is not necessary, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the plebiscite, the idea that perhaps we don't need that. I think, as the writer says again in his column, that most people are convinced that it's time for us to stop meddling or try to meddle in public opinion by continuing to regulate store hours in this province. Time once and for all to move on. Municipal leaders, Mr. Speaker, they're opposed to holding a plebiscite on this question as well, I should point out. The President of the Union of Nova Scotia, the President of the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, on this question is against that, and also he says, his name is Don Zwicker, by the way, that municipal leaders are opposed to holding a plebiscite on the question as part of the municipal elections because regulating Sunday shopping is a provincial responsibility. It does not belong on the municipal agenda. It's a provincial responsibility, so we're dealing with it as a provincial responsibility. I mentioned before about the red tape task force some years ago. I already told the House about that, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that all members were listening. Apparently not all were. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, as I said, Bill number 2 will affect some people perhaps in a negative way. We have to tread carefully here. We have to be very careful, Mr. Speaker. We know that the test experiment that went on last Sunday, I think, from what I've heard, has been a success. I heard people saying that this was a great thing, that perhaps and again, the writer of this column says that perhaps Sunday previous to the hurricane should have been open on Sunday as well, which would have allowed people in this province to buy goods prior to the hurricane coming and to stock up, which they couldn't do. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have to allow, you know, a certain amount of latitude here in our thinking. Not everything is always black and white, you know. There are things that you have to take a look at things and step back and say, where are we going with this? Who's going to be adversely affected? And how can we help in that situation? It's exactly what we're doing as a Liberal caucus, Mr. Speaker. We have taken a couple of steps back, even though this has been our baby all along. You know, we're quite proud of that, Mr. Speaker, the fact that Sunday shopping, whose time has come, and even now, the New Democratic Party can't argue anymore. They're just down and out, and all they can say is, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Sunday shopping is coming. It's inevitable. Mr. Speaker, I agree. It's inevitable. The fact of the matter is, we've come. We will protect the rights of workers. We'll make sure that no one in this province has to work on Sunday if they don't want to work on Sunday, Mr. Speaker, and we'll make sure that those concerns are met. Now, Mr. Speaker, I think I've made it perfectly clear what my position on Sunday shopping is. I'm in favor of it. I think it's time in 2003 that Nova Scotia move forward. I think this will be good for the province. Not to say that perhaps, Mr. Speaker, we can expect perhaps some opposition to it. Of course we can. But all in all, Mr. Speaker, let's take a look at it. Sunday shopping is indeed an idea whose time has come in this province. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I'll certainly be in favor of this legislation when it comes forward. I'm hoping that there will be some improvements to some aspects of the legislation. We'll deal with that at a later date. But again, Sunday shopping, and I think probably I'll table that article now, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that what Sunday shopping, just as the article headline states, what the decision on Sunday shopping reveals actually is the inconsistency of this Tory government. I mean, we should have been here a long time ago, Mr. Speaker. We should be moving ahead not just to a 6-week period followed by a plebiscite in the spring, or the fall, I should say. We should be moving ahead full-time Sunday shopping as soon as, I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chiboucto.
I've heard it said by people whose opinion I respect that for virtually any extremely complex problem, there is a simple solution, and it's usually wrong. I was put in mind of this statement when I listened first to the leader of the Liberal Party on the subject of Bill number 2, and then again as I've listened to other members of the third party caucus. I beg your pardon, is the honourable member attempting to interrupt? He's just passing through, is he? All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was put in mind of this statement because it seemed to me that the essence of the position that's being put forward by the third party is in this category of a simple solution to a complicated problem. To listen to those speeches, one would think that the issue of extended hours for workers and, or as it's sometimes summarized, the issue of Sunday shopping was a simple one to be embraced by the statement, I'm in favor of it. That's the statement we hear from the Liberal Party. Well, I'm not one who thinks that this is a simple problem. I'm the one who thinks that this is a complicated problem with many dimensions. I'm a person who thinks that this is a problem for which there may be many solutions, for which indeed there are many aspects with which we have to come to grips. And I'm sorry to say that Bill number 2 doesn't really come to grips with all aspects of this problem. Mr. Speaker, we've been encouraged to state what it is that we think in as clear terms as possible about this issue of 7-day-a-week shopping. And I want to say as clearly as I can what it is that I personally think about it, and then move to what it is that I think is the political situation and therefore what is our responsibility as legislators. I have a friend who is a little older than I am, who is now retired from his service in the military. And at one point, he did service with peacekeeping troops in the Middle East. And he observed, upon coming back to Canada, that there is, in his view, the opportunity to achieve some interesting harmonization in that part of the world. And he put it this way. He said, for Muslims, the day of rest, the Sabbath, is Friday. For Jews, the Sabbath and day of rest is Saturday. For Christians, the Sabbath and day of rest is Sunday. He observed that if only people who live in the Middle East could coordinate and reconcile their differences, they would have the makings of the 4-day week immediately. Now, although he told his observation as an amusing anecdote, he has a point. And the point is not only that a day of rest has religious origins. And the point is not only that for many people, a day of rest continues to have religious overtones. For me, if I actually had my druthers, not only would I like to see stores closed on Sunday, I would like them to be closed on Saturday and Friday as well. Not, Mr. Speaker, because of an attempt to embrace throughout society those 3 days of rest in those 3 named religions. For all I know, there may be other religions that have other days of rest. That's not the issue for me. The issue for me is that I believe that we live in a society that has become entirely too consumer-oriented. I believe that we live in a society in which the question of the values is skewed. I believe that we live in a society in which, unfortunately, the drive towards consumerism has become so pervasive that it doesn't leave much room for other values to assert themselves. I would be happy if indeed there were less shopping and more family activity. I would be happy if there were less shopping and more community activity. I would be happy if there were less shopping and more music, more arts, more culture, more creativity. I would be happy if there were less shopping and more sports, more recreation, more fitness. I would be happy if there were less shopping and more attention to education. But you know what? My option, my preferred option, is not on the political agenda these days in this form, unfortunately. And I want to emphasize the word unfortunately, because that is the position I hold on this. And I know that it's not a unique position. I know that there are very many Nova Scotians who have similar views to the one I've enunciated. At the same time, the political reality is that there is an enormous demand out there for consumers to be able to shop in extremely extended hours. Now, I've said that I don't particularly like that, and I have said that I think this is a complicated problem, and I have said that we have to take account of other values in society. What I don't think, unfortunately, is that at this point in history, given what it is that public opinion happens to be in Nova Scotia, that it's open to us as legislators to do anything other than to move in the direction of opening up hours for shopping. I'm sorry that's the case, but I think it is the case. And if that is the case, then we have to take account at the same time of these other values that I've mentioned. Because this is, as I said, a complicated problem. It's not one that can simply be solved by saying, let all the private market actors decide what hours they wish to be open. Let us embrace Sunday shopping. Let us say that it's okay. Let us bring in a couple of amendments to our existing legislation, and the problem goes away. The problem does not go away. This is not one of those complicated problems for which there is an easy, simple solution. The simple solution, as I indicated at the beginning, is in fact wrong in the sense of being inadequate. So given that we all know, and I think we probably all do know, having been so recently in touch with people in our constituencies during the election process, that there is an enormous demand for longer hours, what do we do? Well, this bill tells us that what we do is hold a plebiscite a year from now. Now, I have to immediately say that that's another example of the solution that's been put in front of us that is wrong. It's wrong not only because the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities tells us that it's not interested in having a plebiscite associated with next year's municipal elections. They regard it as a distraction. They regard this as a provincial-level problem that ought to be solved by clear policy leadership from the provincial level, and it ought not to be mixed up with local municipal elections. And I think they're right. just as there ought to be uniform rules across the province. That is to say, this is not a problem that is to be given off to the local municipal level, since the result could be different rules in different parts of the province. I'm not saying that's part of the bill. Clearly it isn't part of the bill. But what if in the plebiscite we were to find clear differences from constituency to constituency? What if in the plebiscite we were to find there are clear differences in regions? Suppose Cape Breton, for example, votes overwhelmingly one way and Metro votes overwhelmingly another way. And suppose parts of the rural mainland vote one way and other parts vote a different way. What is the government telling us it's going to do with the results of this plebiscite? They're not telling us. It's not in the bill. They're not saying that they'll divide the province up by region or by constituency, or that they'll weigh everything in terms of the province overall and come up with one solution and implement it. I know some attempt has been made to lay out 3 alternatives that people can address.
Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax-Shabukto has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know some attempt has been made to lay out 3 reasonably clear questions for people to deal with. But how reliable is it going to be? What is the normal turnout at municipal elections? It's not high, unfortunately. It just isn't. That's a hard fact of life. Maybe the plebiscite will attract more voters. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be a real issue in some parts of the province. Maybe in others it won't be. Who knows how reliable it will be? And again, I ask, what is the government saying it's going to do with the results of this plebiscite? They haven't really told us. Certainly not in the legislation. What I think is that the device of the plebiscite is not a reliable device to use on this question. And I think furthermore, it's not a good public policy device to use on this question. I think it's our obligation as legislators to devise a solution here. And given that we have a minority government, this is indeed an ideal topic on which we ought to be able to hammer out some kind of solution among the 3 parties where there might be some harmonious result. I think looking to a plebiscite is an evasive tactic. I think it attempts to evade our responsibilities in this chamber. Speaker, before me, the member from Glace Bay quoted from an article in today's Chronicle Herald by the editor of the business page, Mr. Roger Taylor. And in that article, as he correctly says, Mr. Taylor points out that there's not a lot of point in holding the referendum next year, since he offers the opinion, we know the result right now. Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. That isn't the main reason. I think at this point, probably in our own constituencies, many of us do know the result. And I suppose even if we do know the likely result, assuming that there were a large turnout, that in the end doesn't determine why it is that we ought not to have this plebiscite. We ought not to have it because we can work out amongst ourselves what it is that we ought to do. So what ought we to do? Given that there is overwhelming demand, we have to decide what the problems are. We have to decide what the downsides are. And we have to decide whether there are ways to offset those downsides. I mentioned what, for me, is the number one downside. That is to say that this essentially sends a signal about the kind of society we are here. Signal it sends is that we have adopted what is the predominant ethos of the rest of North America, that is an ethos in favor of consumption over virtually any other value. Well, how are we going to offset that? If we have to accept this, if it turns out that public opinion, as most of us believe, is so overwhelmingly in favor of this particular change in our laws, how can we offset that? Now, one way, although I don't expect it to be in legislation, I don't necessarily expect it to be the kind of thing that might be enacted as a mandatory law, but I do expect it to be the sort of approach that we might hear from the government. One way might be to try to strengthen other values. What are we going to do, for example, about libraries, art galleries, museums? Are they going to be open 7 days a week? Or are they going to be open extended hours? Perhaps to balance the consumer interest. I'm not saying it should be mandatory. What I am saying is that since most of these institutions in our province are ultimately funded and ultimately in the control of the provincial government, what are they going to do in order to enable these institutions to strengthen their presence in the community? So that if people have time available to them, they can visit the museums, libraries, and art galleries and educate themselves and their families. They can spend time with their families together doing these things. Well, that's one example of something that I would have liked to have heard the minister say when he introduced this legislation. That having decided that he was going to extend hours for shopping, he was going to likewise strengthen community life elsewhere. He might have stood up and said he's going to be putting more money into sport and recreation. Didn't say that. The minister did not say that he was going to create more daycare spaces or allow daycares to, or encourage daycares to be open longer hours to correspond with the kind of extended hours that might be required for some employees. We didn't hear that. Now, it may be that this is the kind of measure one wouldn't necessarily expect to be in the legislation, but it is the kind of policy direction that the government could take. They could have said, in recognition of this other change in our society, we are going to strengthen family life by putting in place these other kinds of supports. What about our universities and our schools? Something else could have happened again to make them more available to the community, to strengthen community life, to offset the signal that consumerism is the predominant value that ought to prevail. But we didn't see that, and I would encourage, because I don't believe it's too late, I would encourage the minister and his government to consider these points and to consider the opportunity to show some leadership in strengthening other parts of life in our community in order to offset that. Now, a number of my colleagues have mentioned, and I think mentioned correctly, that another aspect of life that ought to be strengthened to go hand in hand with the extension of shopping hours is the protection of workers. I think as well that we are going to be causing serious problems for the small business community in Nova Scotia, and I will make remarks about the small business community, but I want to start with protections for workers. I want to be clear that I don't place this exclusively on a religious ground. Undoubtedly, there are workers out there who believe that their religion requires them to take an appropriate day of rest. And our laws should be crystal clear that there is complete protection for workers in that position. This should not be left in doubt for any individual. It shouldn't be left as a matter of the amorphous rights, I have to say, specified in the Charter or in the Human Rights Code. It's exactly the kind of thing that ought to be specified in detail in the legislation. But of course, religious objections are not the only objections. Workers have to be protected in other ways. It's clearly not appropriate for workers to be required to be at their place of work 7 days a week, week in, week out. There have to be breaks. There have to be protections. And those protections have to be detailed and abundant. And if we're going to open up the Labor Standards Code to look at some of the protections that are there for workers, then this is the time to look at the Labor Standards Code in order to change, to bring ahead 2 centuries into the 21st century from the 19th century, where our Labor Standards Code is mired. Some of those rules. Some of my colleagues have mentioned a number of them. They've mentioned what's the normal permissible number of hours as specified in the legislation now. It's 48. That's not appropriate. That number should be much smaller. And what about overtime? Overtime, as any low-wage Nova Scotian will know, is calculated on the minimum wage. It is not calculated on the basis of the actual wage that they receive. So an employee who's making a bit more than the minimum wage, even when they've worked for the number of hours that qualify them for time and a half, get time and a half based on the minimum wage, not on their actual wage. That is an anachronism of our Labor Standards Code. And if we're going to be saying to the public, yes, we respond to your demand for extended hours of shopping, at the same time, we have to say to employees in no uncertain terms, we are going to protect you, each and every one of you, and we are going to protect you in appropriate ways. So far, Bill 2 just doesn't do it. So if this bill is going to go forward, the government should do a thorough job. And the opportunity is here for the 3 parties to coordinate amongst ourselves ways in which this legislation can advance the various agendas that we all have. Because this is not a simple issue. This is a complicated issue that requires a detailed response. It's not enough just to say, as the leader of the Liberal Party has said, I'm in favor of Sunday shopping, end of story. And we know that the existing system is much too complex. We know that the existing system, with its distinctions made among different kinds of activities based on the floor area of the different enterprises, is full of loopholes, it's inconsistent, it's puzzling to people, needs changing. It's exactly the kind of question that should be worked on now and could be worked on now. We don't need to wait for the results of a plebiscite on this. And I have to say that I don't think this is a simple question in terms of tourism, although we've heard representatives of the tourism industry try to suggest to us that it's open and shut. Their view, apparently, is that every tourist who comes here wants extended hours Sunday shopping. On the other hand, although I'm prepared to agree there may be some tourists who want that, I don't think that's what most people come to Nova Scotia for. I think most people come to Nova Scotia as tourists because we're a different kind of place. And I don't mean that we have to be quaint and mired in life 2 centuries ago. This isn't Sherbrooke Village writ large for 1 million people. But it is a different kind of life than many of our tourists, many of them from the United States, experience at home. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if you've had the opportunity recently to visit the eastern seaboard of the United States, the place from which many of our tourists come to visit us. But virtually the whole of that eastern seaboard of the United States is wall-to-wall, dense urban area characterized by strip malls. And although different communities have different names, you can't tell when you're in one and you've left the next one. That isn't what we want in Nova Scotia. We have plenty of malls, more than enough, I would say. And I say that as someone who has located in his constituency 2 shopping centers. It's not that they're not places of activity and business and in some sense wealth generators. They are. But at the same time, this leads me to another aspect, which is the different position of large and small enterprises. Before I turn to that, I just want to finish my earlier thought, which is we don't need to change Nova Scotia into a community which is characterized by nothing but strip malls and shopping centers. I don't want to see that happen. And yet it's a risk. When we pass legislation that sends the signal that says that consumption at the convenience of the consumer is a value that we embrace, then we have to think about ways in which we can offset a trend towards strip malls and shopping centers. Will there be planning legislation? Will there be planning directives from the Minister of Municipal Affairs? There is a power under Schedule B of the Municipal Government Act for the Minister of Municipal Affairs to issue planning guidelines to municipalities on a variety of topics. Will the minister use that power to restrict the extent to which we can be overrun by strip malls and shopping centers? I asked the Minister of Municipal Affairs to think about that. We certainly heard nothing from the minister who introduced this legislation that was on his mind. But the planning implications of moving to longer shopping hours, surely we have to engage with. That's an example of something that might make this a more meaningful exercise. Again, it's not a simple problem for which there's an easy solution. It's a complex problem for which the simple solution does not work. So let's look then at the question of large and small enterprises. I said a moment ago that shopping centers can be sources of wealth generation. Indeed, they can. They can be places of employment for local people. But you know what? Many of those businesses aren't locally owned. Many of those businesses are owned, headquartered, that is to say, elsewhere in Canada or elsewhere in the world. Many of these are multinational corporations. That means that the profits from those companies go somewhere else. We know that when you buy from small local enterprises, small local businesses, that their profits tend to stay in the community. Those people educate their children here, they buy housing here, they buy their food here, they buy their clothing here, they enrich the community. Now, this isn't something over which we necessarily have a lot of control. The major financial and economic levers are in the hands of the federal government. They're the ones who can control foreign ownership. They're the ones who have signed international trade agreements like NAFTA. They're the ones who control banking. Those are the kinds of things that are primarily in the hands of the federal government, but we have to do something if we want to strengthen the economy of our local area, if we are going to open up longer shopping hours. I heard nothing from the minister about this part of the problem. If we open up shopping hours in response to consumer demand, what should we do in order to protect local businesses? And if we can't protect them, let's be square and say to them, there's nothing we can do. But the minister has to engage with this. There should be studies from the Department of Economic Development talking about the impact on locally owned businesses of what it will do when we open up these hours for consumers. Where are those studies? What are we being told? What, if anything, can that department do in order to help those local businesses? And why don't we hear from the ministers concerned details about that? We need to hear that. The public needs to hear that. There should be, accompanying this bill number 2, a plan that will strengthen the local economy in areas that might be hard hit by this. But such a plan has not been offered us. Again, I say, this is not a problem with an easy answer. And I'm not suggesting that it's easy to deal with this particular point or with any of the other points that I brought up. But at the same time, we can't ignore these consequences. And here's another aspect that we haven't heard any comment on from the government. What about regional differences inside our province? It is predictable that some parts of this province will benefit economically at the expense of others. And it is predictable that it's right here in Metro that people are more likely to gain, if there is indeed any advance in the economic activity as a result of these longer hours. And that's a question, I have to say, and I'll get to that in a moment. But if we assume for the moment that there is an increase in economic activity based on longer hours, the benefit will mostly be here in Metro. Well, I'm an MLA who gets elected here in Metro. Thank you very much to the government and its support from the third party for this bill if it's going to increase economic activity here at the expense of the home constituencies of my honourable friends who sit beside our party in the opposition, or indeed at the expense of the honourable members who are backbenchers in the government. They come from rural areas that are not going to be as well equipped in terms of existing shopping centres and malls and big box stores to attract that consumer demand if it really is out there. That's a phenomenon that already exists. I think I've heard members from Cape Breton say that already it's not unusual for residents of Cape Breton to travel to Metro for a day or for a day and an overnight trip in order to do some of their major shopping. And undoubtedly, this is having negative economic consequences on the home territory of those people. And what I'm saying is that there will be increased negative economic impacts on those areas as a result of Bill number 2. What is the government proposing to do about this? It's an unanswered point, but it's a point we have to take seriously, and I think it's a point that the public expects us to look at. It's not sufficient for us to respond to the consumer part of the public that says, I want greater convenience in my shopping. We have to look at those individuals in another aspect of their life, namely as employees or as store owners or business owners themselves, and say to them, we are looking out for your interests. We're thinking a step or two ahead, and we're worried about the negative economic impact on you of your demands as a consumer. We're worried about the negative economic impact of your demands as a consumer on Metro, on the province, on Cape Breton. And if we're not doing that, if the government isn't leading the way on this, if we're not finding ways, and they don't have to be statutory ways, they don't have to be in the bill, if we're not finding policy ways in order to offset that, then we are failing these very same people who are saying to us, in clear terms, that they want longer hours for shopping. It's not enough, it's not good enough to simply say, we accept your requirements, we accept your demand for longer shopping hours, if we're going to overlook, fail to respond to the needs of those people in other economic areas of their lives. Because we know that economic life does not end with being a consumer. Well, this is going, predictably, to be much harder for smaller businesses than for larger businesses. And it's going to be much harder for the rural areas, the remote areas of this province, than it's going to be for Metro. And it's going to be much easier for the owners of businesses than it's going to be for employees. And for some people, it's going to be a matter of conscience. For some people, it's going to be a matter of practicalities as to how they can arrange their lives. And we have to ask ourselves again, why is it that this bill is coming forward? This bill comes forward in response to public demand. And although I know that that's the predominant feeling, I'm not convinced that there is going to be an economic stimulus from longer hours. Several other members, I think, have made this point by saying that there's only so much money to go around. It doesn't automatically increase our gross domestic product to extend shopping hours. I want to point out something that occurred to me not actually so long ago. It was this summer, just because it illustrates so well what it is that is part of the problem. This was on a Friday night right here in Metro. Friday night. In Halifax, the economic center of the province, the economic center of Atlantic Canada. And it happened only a few blocks away from here. On a Friday evening, I went out to do a couple of errands. And I thought, I'll go pick up my laundry, my shirts, at the laundromat. And it was 7 o'clock by the time I got to the laundry that I use. And you know what? They just closed. And it was a summer evening, and it was pleasant. And I was by the public library on Doyle Street, which has shops on it. And I thought, well, I'll pick up something for dinner. I'll go to the Italian market and see what they have. But by that time, it was 8 o'clock. And you know what? They had just closed. Friday night, in the summer, in Halifax, they didn't have to be closed at 8 o'clock. My laundry didn't have to be closed at 7 o'clock, but they were. And they were closed because it made sense for them. They were family businesses. They'd had enough for the day. They weren't going to spend 24 hours a day in their store or even 20 hours a day in their store. And you know what? They're not wrong. There weren't such a huge number of customers as to justify them staying open till 9 and 10 at night or to midnight. For some businesses, maybe there are. Occasionally on some grocery stores, fine. Pharmacies, fine. But those are things that have an emergency aspect in the case of pharmacies, or a high demand in the case of grocery stores. But I am far from convinced that there is going to be a big economic stimulus as a result of extending the hours. And if that's the case, if it is the case that, as we know, there is only so much money to go around, and indeed, Nova Scotians, I'm happy to say, have other places to be in their evenings, then maybe this won't make a lot of sense. But you know what? It will have been an experiment that will have caused a lot of difficulty for individual employees and for the owners of small businesses. And if we don't engage with these different and difficult aspects of the consequences of longer shopping hours, then we're failing Nova Scotians. Now, I've heard members, I think I just most recently heard the honourable member from Glace Bay making fun of the members of our party because we've taken the view that extended shopping hours are probably an inevitability. Well, why are they an inevitability? It's not just consumer demand. It's probably the result of the legal situation. I'm not going to go into details about the legal situation, but the result is probably that if our existing legislation were challenged, it would not survive the challenge. There could be much longer debate about this, and I've talked with members of this House before in detail about the legal aspects of other bills that have come before this House. I'm not going to do that for this bill because I think there are much more interesting and much more important aspects to this bill, which I've outlined earlier. And yet we are stuck with this problem that public opinion has dramatically shifted over the last decade in Nova Scotia. Pretending that we can put off the day by a plebiscite is not leadership. Pretending that this is a simple issue, or even that it's a complicated issue but has a simple solution, as we hear from the third party, is not leadership, and it's wrong. What I say is that this is a complicated problem with many dimensions, and that if we fail to come to grips with all the different aspects, then we will have failed Nova Scotians. Our party, Mr. Speaker, does not intend to avoid the consequences or the multi-dimensional aspects of this bill. We've started by noting and will bring forward amendments that have to do with workers' protections because this seems the most accessible part of the consequences of this bill to being dealt with by legislation. But there are policy aspects that have to be dealt with by the discretionary administrative and budget powers of the government, and we don't see that. So at this point, what we can say is that our position should not be in doubt. Our position is that this is a complicated question that requires protections for Nova Scotians on a whole host of fronts, and we'll be standing up and pushing for those kinds of protections now, during the continuing debate on this bill, and at every opportunity after this. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, take this opportunity this afternoon to make a few statements, most of them pretty clear in relation to Sunday shopping. Since I am a strong proponent of Sunday shopping, I come from a riding that actually is polarized in some respects in that there is a very, very strong conservative, I say small c, and for many years, a big C as well, but a small c conservative constituency in a rural farm community, but also one that has a community that reflects where modern Nova Scotia needs to go. And that is a military base with 2,000 personnel, who during the election gave me a very, very clear indication of the kind of community, even though a small town community of about 5,000, that they wanted the possibility of Sunday shopping. So on one end of the riding, I have the military base of Greenwood, and in the other end of the riding is the large plant, the Michelin plant, with over 1,000 workers. And I use both of those examples because they reflect almost now 1/2 of the constituents of Kings West, with over 1,000 workers in the Michelin plant, most of them as well living certainly in Kings West, some also Kings South, Kings North, and with over 2,000 military personnel in Greenwood. So that's a very, very large constituency in which to draw some good examples in support of Sunday shopping. For the workers at Michelin, who now work on a 3-day, 36-hour week, 3 12-hour shifts, they would like that opportunity when their shift ends on a Saturday. For them, Sunday is an opportunity that they would like to have available to shop. And so I would say, however, perhaps the most striking comments were made by people at Greenwood at the Air Force Base. Many of them who have lived in 6 provinces of Canada. And the question that, or not so much the question, but the comment they gave me was that it's nice to see one party very clear on wanting to modernize Nova Scotia. In the 6 provinces in which most lived, including Newfoundland, they had the opportunity to shop on Sundays. So shops should be permitted to be open afternoon on Sunday, but retailers not to be forced to open. And I think in many of the provinces across the country, people have found their way in this regard. Not all shops do open. The nature of some stores will mean that they will not all open on a Sunday. Workers' rights need to be protected. I know the official opposition have certainly made this point throughout most of their time to debate this issue, and certainly we stand for very, very strong legislation to protect the rights of the worker so that they will not have to work on Sunday under any circumstances if they so wish. And certainly a 36-hour from the time that they would finish on a Saturday would obviously include the Sunday, and they would not have to engage in any work. There are certainly many examples now throughout Nova Scotia of organizations that are supporting Sunday shopping: the Tourism Association, TIANS, the Hotel Association of Nova Scotia, and the Metro Halifax Chamber of Commerce. These are certainly distinguished bodies that have taken a look at the need for Sunday shopping in the province and the impacts positively that it will have on the province. Certainly, Sunday shopping, when it comes down to the individual, it should indeed be a matter of choice for individuals and not for government. I know at the personal level, having the choice is what I would like to engage in. I probably wouldn't be a Sunday shopper, but I think when the choice is there, then I am making that real distinction about not going out, especially into the mall atmosphere, to shop. Certainly, we have seen many examples over the past couple of years from Truro to Amherst, that strip, that ribbon of business, that certainly in the fall of the year, at about this time, the pre-Christmas period, that are negatively impacted by shoppers that do go to New Brunswick, and some also, of course, go as far as Maine. We have taken a very clear leadership position on this issue over the last 2 years. We have distinguished ourselves certainly from the other two parties, and certainly people have pointed out that they like this clear position that we have. Not everybody will agree, but they like the very clear position that we do have. Positive results for the economy are one of the benefits that we will receive. Tourists that go throughout Nova Scotia, in fact, it is the small shop. It is the unique shop that many of our tourists do like to avail themselves of. And Sunday shopping will open up that possibility, Mr. Speaker, for our tourists. And tourism, as we know, is an economic activity that we need to strengthen. And certainly, again, I think Sunday shopping is one of the avenues that we can gain from this legislation. At the current time, with the legislation is looking at a plebiscite, and again, I think the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities have made it very clear that they do not want to engage in a plebiscite at the time when municipal elections are being held. I did a quick little survey of 5 councillors on the Kings County Council, and 4 of them unequivocally stated that they didn't want to see the plebiscite as any part of their election process. They know that people will easily get confused, and they would become the recipients of the question, are you in favor of Sunday shopping? It would simply become part of the municipal package of issues, and they did not want to engage in that. Certainly in the free enterprise system, I think the business owner-operator should have the ability to set their own hours of operation. And TNs have outlined, I think, very straightforward that is the position that they take. The government simply should not have the right to set the hours of businesses that allow others to use loopholes or necessary services to conduct businesses on Sunday. We can now buy a home on a Sunday. We can buy a used vehicle on a Sunday. And certainly the time has come to let all shopkeepers and stores in Nova Scotia the opportunity to open. The mall now is, while it is, I guess, part of our culture, many activities go on in a mall that, in fact, are family-oriented. The only time in the past 2 years in which I've had the occasion to engage in Sunday shopping was last year in St. John's, Newfoundland. And certainly I was perhaps most struck by the fact that on a Sunday afternoon, it was mostly families that were actually in the mall. In other words, in Newfoundland, where there's certainly a strong religious and cultural tradition around Sunday, it was, in other words, a family time. There was more activities going on in the mall than just simply shopping. And so to say that families will be negatively impacted, I don't think there is evidence to suggest that that would be the reality. So I would just like to conclude, Mr. Speaker, that I am pleased to stand in the chamber in support of Sunday shopping. However, I am in support of shopping year-round, not just for the 6 Sundays prior to Christmas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, this is probably a decision which has been made in effect for us by the federal courts. But Sunday shopping has its origins in very ancient tradition, and I always believe that traditions come out of some sort of necessity. In this case, it's a biblical recommendation that says there's going to be a day of rest, and communal rest is fundamental. In fact, in many cultures, communal rest is a lot more enshrined than it is in our culture. Witness those countries where people go to sleep for 3 hours in the afternoon, everybody at the same time, or close up, and just be very grateful that I haven't asked for that one yet. I know. Sleep is one of my favorite subjects, and rest is a second best. But no, in all seriousness, I do think that communal rest is an extremely important part of social integrity. It has happened to be a Sunday because of biblical tradition, which has drawn this, but I think we all recognize quite well the separation of church and state, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, of course, seconds that opinion, knowing that any laws enacted on the base at any level of Canadian government enacted on the basis of religious tradition are not going to be able to stand. So what is it that distinguishes Sunday from the other days of the week? If we enact Sunday afternoon shopping, which is in effect what we are doing, not Sunday shopping, but Sunday afternoon shopping from 12 till 5, from 1 till 6, whichever it will be, we are still protecting something on the grounds of a Sunday, and I'm afraid we're not going to be able to do that either. So what we're really doing is saying that we're going to have shopping 24/7, and I can just about see the signs on Lower Water Street, the neon signs, it'll say shopping 24/7 all the time, or sort of like the Hudson Bay store, shopping is good. But we have other values which must be protected. I am not the person to say that it needs to stay on a Sunday, but we need to protect our workers. We also need to protect our consumers. Children, in extraordinary ways, are being pressured to become consumer units. And we are in a position at this point to take a stand. Some of us, I think many of us in this House, have somehow survived the transition from imperial measurement to metric. And perhaps the shift from a Sunday to a Tuesday, a Thursday, a Friday, some other day without religious connotations is something that our next generation could survive. Keep the benefit of common rest. Yeah. Stand up. All right. Thank you. All right. Oh, thank you very much. All right. I'll try. Okay. As I say, it's going to be a very difficult thing to protect any portion of the week. And if anybody in this household has ever tried to put a child to bed on a summer Sunday, on a summer evening, when everybody else is outside playing, you know what it's like. It's really, really difficult to make somebody rest. Or if you've worked shift work and your time to sleep is during the daytime, it's really difficult to sleep when everybody else is hard at it. They're ringing the phone, they're doing whatever. And if somebody is doing business on any given day of the week, it becomes 7 days a week of steady activity. This is about the protection of more than just individual sectors of workers. We know that there are kinds of activity which do take place 7 days a week at this point, but that's not to say that we need to spread this across the board. I've never tabled a document here, but I'm tempted to at this point. This was a textbook which was used in the Nova Scotia schools into the 1950s, after the Second World War. It was written just before. And in the chapter on the tourist trade, there's a paragraph which says, "Why tourists come?" 1931. Nova Scotia has many attractions for visitors. Our summers are relatively cool and refreshing, especially near the seashore. The topography of the province is such that in the course of a short drive, a tourist can observe a great variety of natural scenery: mountains, valleys, rocky seashore pounded by ocean surf, sandy beaches, rivers, freshwater lakes, saltwater lakes, tidal rivers, dikelands, forests, etc. Bright colors of hardwood leaves make the country particularly beautiful during late September and early October. Many opportunities for sports are available, such as fishing, hunting, salt and freshwater bathing, hiking, yachting, canoeing, camping, archery, golf. It's all one paragraph. Many features of our industrial life and many of our rural and village communities provide scenes of interest to visitors from large cities. The many historical sites scattered throughout the province are a source of interest to many visitors. Public celebrations such as the Apple Blossom Festival, Lobster Fisheries Carnival, the Guides Meet at Lake William, and the Fisheries Exhibition at Lunenburg attract many visitors. And of course, many people come to visit relatives and friends. I didn't hear a word about coming from the States to go shopping. Not a word. And you know, stand up. Okay. I have to table it. Do I get it back? Thank you. Okay. All right. So, if any, probably a lot of us have visited places. There are places where they say it's a great place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. And I haven't often heard that said about Nova Scotia. Some of those places that are a great place to visit, and I don't want to live there, are places that have had Sunday shopping now for the last 20 years. One of those places, actually a collection of jurisdictions that's going to remain nameless, is a place where over the last 15 years, the average work week of the salaried employee has changed from 40 to, I believe it's the high 50 hours. I'm sorry, I can't give you the exact figure. But salaries haven't gone up. People shop on Sundays because they've got no other time. That's the non-tourists. That's those of us who live here. If you can't shop on a Sunday, you have to stop to do your shopping sooner or later. I'm sorry, I keep saying Sunday. Let's make this a generic day. I just want to put in my plea for continuing the tradition of communal rest that we have here, and for not discriminating against any sector of our society, particularly that most vulnerable, ununionized retail worker sector, forcing them to be the first ones out of the gate for the 24/7 work week. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader to close debate on Bill number 2.
Yes.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity here to speak on Bill number 2. I think it's a responsibility of the opposition here in this House to debate the concerns we have on this bill and to recommend any productive amendments that should take place on this bill. I think this is in the best interest of all Nova Scotians that we do make these concerns to this House at this time, and that we welcome the cooperation from the government in asking them when they've asked for our input on this bill. And I'm hoping that there will be further improvements that can be put in place in order to protect workers. And I think that's one of the most important things in this bill, is that we need to ensure that we protect the workers of this province. This is one of the reasons why I'm here in this House today, Mr. Speaker, is that I once was on the end of the other end of legislation that was going to impede my working conditions and the ability for myself and my colleagues to obtain a decent contract. As many of the members in this House today were here several years ago when the paramedic strike had taken place, and it was the current government was bringing legislation in to impede that process. That we were trying to get a fair deal and a fair living out of a collective bargaining process. Many of the members that were in my party stood here debating, and as you may say, maybe delaying the bill's passing, but it was important to the workers in this province. It was important to paramedics that our concerns were heard, and that our ability to have what we thought was important heard in this province. And I want to thank many of the members back then that they did this. And we did come to a resolution, and it was brought forward without a bill being passed in this House. And I think that's why we're here today to debate certain aspects of bills. Also, more recent would have been Bill 68 that had to deal with the nurses' strike.
Order, please. Order, please. I realize the honourable member is a new member, but bills at second reading are obviously an opportunity for members to discuss the issue that's before the House at this time, which is the Sunday shopping bill. So I'd ask the honourable member to bring his comments back to that bill, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just thought he'd have some latitude.
So what I was trying to say is that I think this government needs to bring bills forward that do keep in mind the workers of this province. And with Bill number 2, I think we need to make some amendments to this, and I hope they will take our suggestions, amendments seriously, and make some changes to it. During the election, many of the concerns of my constituents on Sunday shopping were brought to my attention. A lot of them had to deal with the small businesses and the retailers that live in my constituents out in Sackville-Cobequid. Their concerns that they may be forced to work on weekends and may be forced to work on Sundays, where they presently don't do that. Many of the managers that are out in the business today in the retail are work Monday to Friday, and on Saturday, because their business is open, are put on call. They're not scheduled to work, but they are put on call in case something arises in their businesses that they need a contact for their employers that are there working. They've have some concerns that now that if Sunday shopping is brought forward, that they may be forced to be on call also on Sundays, which would literally say that they're working 7 days a week. So I think we really need to emphasize that the clauses in this bill really do protect the workers, and that there will be clauses there that have an avenue for them to go through if they are put in a position where they are forced to work on the Sundays. I think this bill needs also some work to do with some of the minimum wage that is currently provided. A lot of these retail workers that may have to work on the Sundays. With the implementation of maybe a increase to move the minimum wage to a living wage would make it easier for them to make ends meet. A lot of these workers that work in retail don't bring home a lot of money, and if Sunday shopping comes in place, that they may not be able to actually say no to working Sundays, because it does mean a larger paycheck for them. And I think if we can address the minimum wage in this bill and maybe make changes to that they'll be able to have the opportunity to say no to working on Sundays. And I think that's a very important thing to address in this bill, because a lot of the members have stated about family time. And Sunday right now, for a lot of these employees, is the only day that they have to spend with their family. Now, I've come from a profession where I've worked 7 days a week, 365 days a year, or on a rotation schedule. I don't work 365 days a year, but I've worked many holidays, and as yourself, Mr. Speaker, in your past profession, and I understand the time for family and quality time for family. So that's why I think if you do make some amendments, especially to the minimum wage, it gives them the opportunity to be able to state that they don't need to work on a Sunday if they choose to. I think if we leave things the way they are, they may be forced to work on Sundays, not because their employers are forcing them to work on Sundays, but because they need that income to keep their family running. I'd like to talk a little bit on the plebiscite that's being proposed in this bill. That the bill states that a plebiscite will take place in the next municipal election, which
It'll piggyback on the next election.
piggyback on the next municipal election. I think next October 2004, I believe, is when they're going to the voters to re-elect their councillors for their certain municipalities throughout this province. I'm also wondering about maybe the cost incurred during this plebiscite, and to also place this on the ballot. I'm sure it's, I don't know what the figures are. It would be nice to maybe know what the price of this would end up costing the province. I think to have, I don't recollect the last time we had a plebiscite on an issue here in the province. I'm a little younger than some of the members, but I don't remember ever answering a question on
Nor have I.
on a election time at election
Darwin
time.
Norris says that he doesn't recall either.
Yeah, okay.
You can say that.
So I think by bringing Sunday shopping to a plebiscite, I think there may have been some more important issues that could have been used other than the Sunday shopping. From what I've heard in my constituents through the past campaign in the summer, was that it wasn't a big issue on their plate. Yes, there were some people that were opposed to it because mostly they're the ones that would be greatly affected by this, by the retailers and the workers.
That's why we have to protect them.
That's right. So I think that we could have chose maybe a different issue to bring to a plebiscite. Maybe the auto insurance question would have been a good one to bring to a plebiscite for the province, to find out what they really wanted on that. I think it was a bit premature to just tack on the Sunday shopping to this one. I think the majority of the province here, and I presume, and I would hope most of the members in this House who have been canvassing through their campaign have heard what their constituents want. I truly believe that the majority of the people in this province are ready for Sunday shopping. So to waste the money on a plebiscite in October 2004, I think we could have done a better job at maybe not bringing that forward. I also would like to bring up the concerns where this plebiscite is being attached to a municipal election, Mr. Speaker. The voter turnout for municipal elections is drastically less than what it is for a provincial election. But if we continue to have summer elections, our numbers may be close to that in the near future. I don't know. I know our numbers were down the last election, and I hope we don't get down to the percentage of a municipal election turnout, that's for sure. I think that the councillors and the potential candidates that are running in the upcoming municipal election throughout this province don't want this attached to it. This is going to put in a provincial issue in a municipal election. These people, these men and women who are going to run in this municipal election coming up, now have to decide if they're really going to tackle the issue on Sunday shopping. It's going to be an issue, and I think that since it's a provincial issue, it should be dealt in a way that it's on our territory, I guess, or on our
To the next provincial election.
our election system. We're imposing provincial issues on municipal affairs. There's so many important municipal issues that are happening in our municipalities throughout this province today that I think this will take away from those important issues being brought forward and debated and talked about during the municipal elections in October of 2004. I think it's in order to get the turnout for these elections up, I think they need to tackle their own issues and not have to be imposed the provincial issues. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about the impact this is going to have on some of the constituents in my area. And as many of the members in the third party have stated that we seem to be flip-flopping on this, but I really think it's strongly that we have to bring the issues or the concerns of our constituents are for it, that are for it, and that are against it. And some of the people that are against it would be some of these flea market retailers. A lot of these people that sell goods on Sunday in my community, where I have a large flea market every Sunday, subsidize their income by selling goods on Sunday. I just wondered if the province may have got in contact with some of these flea market owners to find out what their input or what their concerns were with this legislation. I'm not sure if they did or not, but I would presume that they have some concerns on where they're going to be able to set up. I understand that this legislation gives a few hours on Sunday, 1 to 6. So maybe there's possibility that the flea markets will still be able to open in the morning. I'm not sure, but it's a concern for many of the vendors that are out there trying to supplement their income, and that also ties back into addressing the minimum wage act, or the minimum wage in this act. And the reason why these people are at these flea markets trying to make extra money, because it's harder and harder every day to make ends meet in this province. And I think we really need to take their concerns into question with this legislation, and we have to address their needs also.
Very good, David.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, I've heard many members talk before me about the stretch of the dollar, and is this bill or the ability to shop on Sunday going to create more revenue for our province, or more revenue for the retailers in this province? And as introduced in New Brunswick, Sunday shopping in Moncton and other major centres were in February 2002, and according to Statistics Canada, the annual sales from 2002 and 2001 just increased by 5.4% in Nova Scotia and 3.2% in New Brunswick. So it also lends to the issue that I think a lot of people state that this has come about because of a lot of people leaving the province, especially on Sundays during the holidays, to go to New Brunswick. But the findings from Statistics Canada state that this isn't so. And I don't think we have a large majority of our population leaving this province to do some shopping. So I think we really need to make sure that the bill brought forward here, Bill number 2, does have the protection that we need to make sure that our workers in this province aren't forced to work on Sundays. And I hope that the government is prepared to back these workers when they do come after this bill or legislation is put through the House, and we try this Sunday shopping on Sundays, that these people that are going to come forward that say they have been wrongly done by because they've refused to work on Sundays, I hope the government is there to support these workers, and that they do have a means of retaining their jobs and not having any loss of income. So I'd like to finish by saying I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. I think it's an important issue, and there's a lot of concern with members of my constituents and throughout the province about this bill. And I hope when it does go to law amendments that people who are for it and against it do make bring the opportunity for them to bring their changes or their wishes to law amendments. So I'd like to thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to rise today, say a few comments on Bill number 2. Speaker, Bill number 2 is about choice. It's about giving choice to Nova Scotians. It's about giving choice to retailers. It's about giving choice to consumers. It's about giving choice to the residents of our province, a choice that has been granted to the residents of almost every other Canadian province. Mr. Speaker, we've heard a number of different discussions have taken place on this bill, and it is important that we hear from the various opinions from our own ridings, and I've heard the member from Sackville-Cobequid indicate just that he thought it was important to bring the different opinions that exists in his own constituency, and that's a great thing. I guess he's misinterpreted some of the criticism that may have come from our caucus about his party flip-flopping as being a criticism for bringing various views from his constituents. That in no way, shape or form was what the comment was meant for. I think it was more meant for some of his own colleagues and their personal positions, I guess, that they've spoken of here in this House, and that would be what would fall under the term of flip-flopping, I guess, Mr. Speaker, to provide more clarification there. Speaker, I also noted the comments made by the member from Halifax-Shabukto when he spoke on this bill, and he said that the Liberal Party was trivializing the issue of Sunday shopping and how Sunday shopping was this complex issue and, you know, that needed such further thought and further analysis, and how the Liberal caucus hadn't taken it seriously enough in their comments. Mr. Speaker, let's be quite clear here. The government in Nova Scotia and this legislature bringing forward Bill number 2 is not reinventing the wheel. This is not rocket science, and this is not this extreme leap of faith that the government is proposing to take for this province. We are merely here catching up to almost every other Canadian province in bringing forward this legislation. At the same time, that is why you've heard some of the comments from my caucus colleagues, basically in saying the time has come to do this. This should have been done before. Let's no longer wait. Let's move forward. But let's not be held up by this plebiscite or by restrictions on how many weeks. Let's allow year-round discussion. Mayor from Halifax-Shabukto said that the comments coming from our caucus were, too simple on this very complex bill. Mr. Speaker, you know very well yourself as to the rules of this House. Debate on a second reading of a bill is more meant to speak about the intent of the legislation, the principle of the legislation, and not to dissect the actual bill clause by clause on second reading. So I think it was quite unfair for the member from Halifax-Shabukto to suggest that members of this caucus have not taken this bill seriously by speaking more on the general intent of the bill rather than focusing on a clause-by-clause analysis. I'm sure if he reads up on the rules of the House, he'll certainly become familiar with the whole committee of the whole process and third reading. So I guess maybe a few more days in this House will give him a better appreciation of how the whole House works, but I digress, Speaker. Speaker, our leader made it very clear upon becoming leader that one of his main concerns was to see Sunday shopping becoming a choice for Nova Scotians. Not only becoming a choice 6 weeks before Christmas, as has been proposed by the government, but becoming a choice year-round. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, it's consumers themselves and retailers that will decide how Sunday shopping will work. It is not ourselves as the elected members here in this House that are going to determine whether it works or it doesn't. Nova Scotians will do that. But we must afford them the choice to be able to make that happen. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I said, we've seen the other provinces throughout Canada who have undertaken allowing shopping on Sundays. I've witnessed myself personally the experience in Moncton a few years ago. I was rather amazed, having been up there on the weekend visiting. I went to the mall, Champlain Mall. I'm sure many of the members will be familiar with it, over in Dieppe, which is one of the largest malls in Atlantic Canada. Went there on Saturday, and then I returned again on Sunday afternoon to be amazed to note there were more cars there on Sunday than there was on Saturday. Now, traditionally, in our area, you'd see that Saturday would be your busiest day of the week for shopping at whatever mall you're going to visit in this province. But to see there how it's become to the point where people actually more go on Sunday than on Saturday, I think once again lends credence to the fact that we must allow Nova Scotians to make the choice as to when they want to do their shopping. Speaker, the traditional adage that people work from Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30, and have Saturdays and Sundays off, the reality is that our workforce has changed here in this province. Many people are working shift work, they're working back shift, they're working irregular hours, they are working Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in some instances. So the idea that Saturday was the one day available to everyone for shopping is no longer the case in 2003. And we need to accept that reality. At the same time, Speaker, I think the bill itself does strike a balance to address some of the concerns which have been raised by constituents and have been raised by a number of religious groups into what the hours should be. I think all parties agree that those hours should not begin before at least noontime and that they should be restricted till sometime around supper. Now, the government has proposed the period from 1 p.m. till 6 p.m. Speaker, I think you've heard a number of other members here in this House get up and say that they've received representation saying that those hours should be changed from 12 to 5, which is my understanding is the case in Ontario. Now, Speaker, I guess I'm not really bound one way or the other as to which one is the better time frame, but I think it's something that we should at least look at, especially through the law amendments process, as to whether 1 to 6 is the best time, or whether 12 to 5 would address some of the concerns which have been raised, obviously, to all members of this House, based on the speeches we have heard today. Mr. Speaker, as our leader has said, this issue is about leadership. Asking Nova Scotians to have a plebiscite on Sunday shopping, to me, Mr. Speaker, is irresponsible. Yes, it is important that we allow Nova Scotians to have a direct say in the affairs of this province. It is important that we as legislators come here and reflect some of the concerns that have been given to us by our electors. So, Speaker, those who come to this House and do not bring the concerns of their electors do not stay here very long. And every member here has learned that lesson quite quickly by watching what has happened in the last few elections and some of the faces that are no longer here in this House. But, Mr. Speaker, when you look at some of the bills that we have dealt with in the last 5 years, I think of the paramedic strike, I think of Bill 68, one of the most regressive pieces of legislation that have ever come before this House. I don't remember the leader of the NDP during that debate saying we should have a plebiscite on Bill 68. We should ask Nova Scotians whether they want their government to be able to pass Bill 68, one of the most regressive pieces of legislation.
Order, please.
Now, Mr.
Order,
Speaker,
please. As I indicated to the previous member who spoke, we'd like to talk about other bills, but there was lots of opportunity at that time for debate, and that date's gone by. The bill before the House this time is Bill number 2, and I'd ask the honourable member to bring his comments back to that bill, please. Thank you. The honourable member for Richmond has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the idea of a plebiscite is one of the main aspects of Bill number 2, which is ahead of us, and it's one of the most contentious issues in the bill itself, which is why I thought it was important to, certainly reflect upon what we have done here in this House in the past few years, some of the legislations we've brought, and that there was never a talk of asking for a plebiscite on those particular pieces of legislation, which to me, I believe, had a bigger direct impact on the lives of Nova Scotians than what Sunday shopping will. So it's a contradiction based on what we've done in the past to now say Sunday shopping is that type of issue which is going to make such a difference in the lives of Nova Scotians, we should put it to a plebiscite. It does not meet that test, Mr. Speaker. If we were the first province to say we're going to allow Sunday shopping, I'd probably have a different view on a plebiscite. Then maybe we would be able to argue here that, look, we're taking a leap of faith. No one else has done it in our entire country. No other province has taken this step. Maybe we should go to Nova Scotians and we should ask their opinion on such an important issue. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that may have been an appropriate argument. In 2003, the last province to not allow any form of Sunday shopping, a plebiscite is not responsible on this type of issue. Mr. Speaker, I believe Nova Scotians have clearly said that. For anyone who questions the polling, and I think we've all questioned some of the polling and wondered, how can we go about thinking that this polling is an accurate reflection of what Nova Scotians want? Well, anyone who's questioned polling only has to look at election night in New Brunswick and election night here in Nova Scotia. And I got to tell you, Mr. Speaker, those polls were about as exact as you could get in predicting the outcome of the election in that province and in this province. Polling has now come to the point where it can accurately reflect what Nova Scotians are thinking and what Nova Scotians will do. And those are two prime examples of where it has worked. The polling numbers are clear in saying that Nova Scotians want Sunday shopping. More importantly, they want it year-round, not just 6 weeks before Christmas. Mr. Speaker, it also raises the question, are we now taking the step to say that any bill that comes in this House, which is of a social impact that may impact on the lives of Nova Scotian, we will have to go to a plebiscite? If that's the case, then maybe the next time when the budget comes up, in the spring, when the Minister of Finance has to cut $32 million from service spending, and plus the transfer cost, plus his 10% tax cut, will we then have to go to a plebiscite before his budget is passed? will the government propose a plebiscite so that Nova Scotians can judge whether they want to see the cuts that he is going to propose? Where are we going down this road, Mr. Speaker? And I think when you look on a national basis, I think we all remember very well the Reform Party. Preston Manning, he wanted a plebiscite on everything. Any issue there was, he wanted a plebiscite. Where is he today, Mr. Speaker? You know, where has his party gone under that form of thinking? We now laugh at that. But we're proposing to do the same thing here in this province. Something we laughed at the federal stage, we're now proposing to do it here in this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've spoken quite clearly that we don't believe there should be a plebiscite. I've heard members from the NDP in the last few minutes say they don't support a plebiscite either. I'd have to say that it hasn't been so clear, coming from their speeches, with all due respect, that they don't support a plebiscite, or that they support Sunday shopping, or that they support it for year-round. And, you know, and I'm not trying to be critical here, but I think one of our members came back and said, I listened to the member from Halifax Needham, and I've never seen so much confusion in my life. He said, because she said she didn't like Sunday shopping, then she liked Sunday shopping, then she didn't like it, then she heard what our leader said, and then she didn't like it anymore. Well, Mr. Speaker, you'll have to forgive us if there was a bit of confusion, and if we somehow were not very clear as to what the position on that was. Mr. Speaker, as we go through this bill, it is going to be important that all parties work on the fact. No, Mr. Speaker, I will resist. I will resist the temptation to make a comment there, Mr. Speaker, but you don't know how hard that is too. But Mr. Speaker, it is important that we all work in this House. It is a minority government. No party has been given a clear majority here in this House, and Nova Scotians have spoken clearly on this bill. We have a party that has more seats than any other party, who has proposed 6 weeks before Christmas and a plebiscite. I think what you are hearing from the speeches from both our caucus and even from the NDP caucus is that there's an opportunity to sit down and to look at amendments to this legislation to make it better reflect what Nova Scotians want to see. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the opportunity to continue those discussions as we move along on this bill. Mr. Speaker, I too must also point out that allowing this plebiscite to take place during a municipal election is clearly inappropriate. Now, we've heard from the UNSM, I've heard from some of the councillors in my own area in Richmond who have said it is not appropriate to do a plebiscite of a provincial issue during a municipal election. Now, Mr. Speaker, you can say, I can just imagine the municipal councillors who will be going out, knocking door to door, as we've just done recently, and when they'll be asked at the door, well, are you for or against Sunday shopping? And I imagine many of them will say, well, it's not my issue, it's a provincial issue. And what are people going to say? Well, why are we voting for it during a municipal election if it's a provincial issue? You know, so Mr. Speaker, this is something, if we were to look at it ourselves, imagine during the last election on August 5th, if the federal government had done a plebiscite on gun control, same-sex marriage, other issues which are clearly federal issues, and yet we would have been responsible as candidates to address those and tackle those, knowing that in reality we had no ability to impact the decision-making process on those issues. That's what we would be doing to municipal councillors if we allow a plebiscite on Sunday shopping to happen during a municipal election. They will be held responsible by the electors based on what their position is on the issue, knowing that in reality they will not have a direct say in the final outcome of that issue. That is irresponsible and it is unfair to do that, Mr. Speaker, and I think we have collectively heard from both our caucus and the NDP caucus that have said that that is inappropriate and that cannot take place. But at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we have learned from the government that to hold a separate, independent plebiscite would cost $2 million. Now, Mr. Speaker, I can only imagine how many other areas where that $2 million would better be spent. I'm sure the member from Hants East would be very happy to see that added to the BSE package being offered to the farmers of this province, or being put to actually put a doctor to man the emergency room at the Strait Richmond Hospital, which is once again closed during the daytime due to the government's inability to put a doctor in there. That $2 million would be better spent in other areas. So a standalone plebiscite also raises very serious issues on the cost, on putting it on, and whether it's even necessary. Now, there's another aspect, Mr. Speaker, and I won't say it's the sinister aspect, but it's the underlying aspect about the plebiscite and its timing, which is important that we at least be able to debate here and that Nova Scotians be aware of. We all know, and history has shown, that municipal elections have some of the lowest voter turnouts of any elections that take place in this province. That is an unfortunate reality. And we all wish here in this House, I'm sure, that that would change and that they would get better turnouts. But they get very low turnouts. As a result of that, we need to ask, will the majority of Nova Scotians even take the time to speak in a plebiscite that would be held during a municipal election? One of the areas of this province that would probably be most impacted or significantly impacted if Sunday shopping is permitted would be here in the Halifax Regional Municipality. I think we've heard quite clearly from the members from the NDP, our own members and others, that there is certainly a great flavor for Sunday shopping amongst the residents of the municipality. Certainly some with concerns, there's no doubt about that, but I think it's fair to say, I think we'd all agree that there is when one looks at the polling, the big numbers that are coming in support of Sunday shopping do come from the HRM area, which is clearly the commercial center that we have here in this province. But Mr. Speaker, we also know that HRM municipal elections have some of the lowest voter turnouts of anywheres here in this province. That's the reality. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think all members would agree that HRM municipal elections have extremely low voter turnouts. And again, that is an unfortunate fact, but it is a fact. That's the reality. So the area of the province that would probably be most impacted by this decision will probably have the least say in this plebiscite. Now, one has to ask the Speaker, one could presume that maybe that's done intentionally, maybe it's a way of the government wanting to make sure that they get the desired outcome. One doesn't know, because one cannot get into the head of the government when they made this decision, whether those were factors that were brought into the equation or not. But I think it's clear no one wants to see a plebiscite, and it's a time, as our leader has said so often, it's a time for leadership. And again, I reflect on when one looks at how many bills and the types of bills we've had to deal with here in this House over the last 5 years, and that this is the one we picked to go ask Nova Scotians their opinion. I can think of many more that would probably have better qualified for such a question being put to the public. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you, it's many people will say that rural Nova Scotia is the area which is most opposed to Sunday shopping. And I have to tell you, I was quite surprised during the last provincial election. I did fully expect to have a number of constituents going door to door that would ask about Sunday shopping, would express their opinions. I was quite pleased, or I shouldn't say pleased, but I guess surprised at how many people, when asking what my position, what our party's position was on Sunday shopping, most of them, the answer was, well, it's about time. Finally. What took so long? That was the type of responses that was coming. Now, Mr. Speaker, Richmond County is about as rural as you can get, and I think members would agree to that. But on the other hand, there certainly were a number of people who did certainly voice some concerns about the impact on the ability to go to Sunday service, the impact on family and everything else. And once it was explained to them that there would be a set amount of hours, that this wasn't going to be from 8 in the morning till 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, many of them were quite pleased to hear that it would only be for a set time, whether it be 12 to 5 or 1 to 6. Because many people were under the belief that if we were going to allow Sunday shopping, it would be like a typical Saturday from 9 a.m. till 6 or even 10 p.m. in some instances. So it is quite clear this will be for a defined set of hours on Sunday. And I think when people do hear about that, especially people concerned about the religious aspect, the impact on family, the impact on working hours, that knowing there is a limit that's being placed there is is an extremely important aspect of this legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, I think everyone also agrees that allowing Nova Scotians to shop on Sunday will be good for the economy of this province. I heard from a number of people in Richmond County, for example, that said this would be a great opportunity to provide some work to students, for example. Maybe some more part-time work for students who are either in university, in high school, community college, that this might provide some more opportunity. A number of them who are single parents said this might be an opportunity for me to get a few more hours in the work week to be able to provide for my family. So they also thought that this would be an opportunity rather than something that was going to be negative. Mr. Speaker, this, like so many bills, unfortunately, what we usually hear is from the opposition and not from the government. But ironically, under the current political map we are faced with, this decision probably has a bigger political impact for certain government members than it has for any opposition members. More specifically, the members from Cumberland South, Cumberland North, Colchester North, Truro Bible Hill are four that I can think of that are probably most impacted politically by the decision that will be made on this bill. Because it is certainly in the area near the New Brunswick border where the elected officials have said we want Sunday shopping and we want it year-round. Which begs the question, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure they're asking the question, where do the members from Cumberland South, Cumberland North, Colchester North, and Truro Bible Hill stand on this legislation? Because those are the areas of this province which have been calling for Sunday shopping for the longest time. Why? Because the fact that Sunday shopping was allowed in Moncton was drawing away consumers from their area who were spending their time shopping in New Brunswick rather than spending their time and investing their money here in Nova Scotia, more importantly in their communities in those four ridings which I've just mentioned. So, Mr. Speaker, I do hope that those members individually will take the opportunity during this debate to clearly let this House know, more importantly, let their constituents know what their position is on the issue of Sunday shopping. And one of the good parts of this, and here in this House, is that sometimes when there's votes and everyone just says yay or nay, it's kind of hard to know where each individual member stood. But the good part is we have rules in this House which do allow for, especially in votes, to be able to specifically identify how each member is going to vote. And I really believe, Mr. Speaker, that especially for the residents in those four areas, that they clearly want to know how their member is going to vote on this legislation. Does their member agree it should only be 6 weeks before Christmas and a plebiscite, which once again is only going to allow them to compete on equal footing with New Brunswick for 6 weeks before Christmas rather than for the entire year? Or are they going to say to their Premier that they want a free vote and they want to be able to vote as their constituents want? As I said before, Mr. Speaker, those who come into this House and who are fortunate enough to come to this House who do not represent the concerns of their residents do not stay here very long. This is an issue which I would say is a predominant issue in those four ridings here in this province. And I would certainly urge their members to be responsible in at least letting this House and letting their constituents know where they stand on this legislation. When amendments will be brought forward, hopefully once again they will be given an opportunity to individually stand in their place and say whether they are for an amendment or against an amendment, and clearly voice to their constituents and to Nova Scotians where they stand on this. As I said from the start, Speaker, I did not intend to be very long on this particular bill, but it is something, again, we are catching up with the rest of the country. We are not leading the charge. I heard the Minister, just on the sidebar, I heard the Minister of Justice today talk about a bill he was going to table. I believe he has tabled it, dealing with the ability to transfer judgments from one province to the next. It was a result of the Uniform Law Conference, and when the Minister was asked by the press, why did it take you so long? He said, well, it didn't take us long. We're the first province to do it. It would be a different debate if on Bill 2 that the minister could stand in his place and say, we're the first province to do it. In this case, he has to say, we're the last province to do it. Enough is enough, Mr. Speaker. It's time to provide Nova Scotians with choice. It's time to provide retailers with choice. It's time to put ourselves on the same economic footing as other provinces. It's time to make sure that the Nova Scotia economy remains as competitive as the economies of any other province in this country. This bill is a beginning. It does not go far enough, but by working together with the concerns that have been raised, with the speeches we have heard, it is my belief that at the end of the day we can stand on third reading with a bill that provides stronger protection for employees, that provides for definite hours on Sunday, but most importantly, provides a bill that will allow Nova Scotians the choice of shopping on Sunday 52 weeks a year. And I look forward to the continued debate on Bill number 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I recognize the honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, you never stop learning in this House, Mr. Speaker, and I know the new member from Halifax Clayton Park was quite upset with the fact that when I had the opportunity to speak at length, which on occasion I do, Mr. Speaker, in this place, when I bring up the names of constituents and I ask them, and after all, with permission to use those names, and when it's an issue of relevance, of great concern to my constituency, I review what has been said to me, what emails have been sent to me, what faxes have been sent to me, with the permission, of course, to use them in the House, Mr. Speaker. So the member from Halifax Clayton Park should be pleased with the fact that, really, I don't have a lot to say on this, mainly because during the last election, during the past summer, I can tell you that the issues that were brought up on the doorsteps of Timberlea Prospect revolved around our high school and, of course, the problem with it, revolved around medical issues and waiting lines and the fact, of course, that we're always going to the Sackville-Cobequid Centre because of the fact of the good service that comes from that particular area. And let me tell you, I would say to them after a while, I said, well, I've heard your views. You know where I stand on insurance. And you're aware of the fact that we're fighting like to have a quality education system in our growing constituency. And if you live on one of those notorious roads that's not paved in growing subdivisions, I'll continue to speak up about that. So I would try to engage some of the people on their doorstep during that summer election. So what do you think about Sunday shopping? It's a foregone conclusion. Let's not worry about it, Bill. That's the response. And in many cases, the inevitability of that and the fact that Sunday shopping is here and is already in existence. And I want to give you an example, Mr. Speaker. As you are well aware, I have a daughter who works in the Yukon for CBC. And when she was home after the election, she took the opportunity on that Sunday to say, before I go back to the Yukon, I've got to pick up a few things. I'd say to her, where are we going? And I could mention some of the names of the businesses. They're in Bears Lake Park. And my wife and 2 daughters decided, Dad, you're not a shopper. We understand that. So why don't you go to another location in Bears Lake Park and decide what particular hardcover books you want to read and have a coffee and sit there and enjoy it, because we are going shopping in Bears Lake Park on a Sunday. And then after we finish shopping, we'll stop by, and perhaps I should mention it, Chapters in Bears Lake Park, where I spent 2 hours that afternoon. And then, of course, I'm picked up by the women in my life, and we go out to that infamous location, or maybe famous location in Bedford, that is wide open. So Sunday shopping is here. It is a foregone conclusion. Now, there are parts of this bill that, of course, are of real concern to us in the NDP. There are parts of this bill that concern us, particularly as we move ahead and go on to law amendments and look at some of the issues that are going to be discussed there. And there will be the opportunity at law amendments, I'm sure, for members of the labor movement, for individual shop owners, to have their opportunity to come and to have their opinion on this particular topic. Now, Mr. Speaker, in a perfect world, there will be a lot less shopping, in my opinion, if I was the ultimate naysayer. there would be a lot less shopping on Sunday. Because in a perfect world, Mr. Speaker, in the community that I grew up, and a community very much you grew up, Sunday was a different time for quality time. It was the opportunity to go to the local ballpark and see a doubleheader on a Sunday afternoon. Or it's the opportunity to take your family skating. Not necessarily in an arena, but if it's an appropriate time of the year and the lakes are safe, it's a time to go down to the Lewis Lake Park and to go family skating in the middle of the winter. In a perfect world, those would be the options that I would prefer if I was the ultimate decision maker when it comes to Sundays. But Mr. Speaker, as you well know from where you're from, and very close to the community that I grew up next to, this issue is of real relevance in some of the constituencies in northern Nova Scotia. Now, I hear the member from Richmond challenge the member from Colchester North to get and speak. I hear the member from Richmond say that the member from Cumberland South and Cumberland North should stand in their spot and speak on behalf of this. I believe from the press that I follow in those local papers in that area, and one of those papers I still receive, those members are listening to their constituents, and they are bringing up those issues. So it's not necessarily a time to grandstand on what issue got us elected to this House, or to bring forward why we would look at an issue such as Sunday shopping. Now, Mr. Speaker,